Death isn't always a transition to the afterlife. Sometimes it's just a legal status granted to you by the people who share your DNA. I used to believe that the end of a man was marked by a heartbeat stopping, but I was wrong. It's marked by the moment a signature is forged and a file is closed. I woke up in a room that smelled of mildew, stale air, and the cold metallic scent of damp concrete. It was a windowless basement apartment, a space that felt more like a tomb than a home, carved out beneath the vibrant life of a house I no longer recognized. My head throbbed with a rhythmic, dull ache that seemed to pulse in time with the flickering overhead light. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a jagged mosaic of flashing headlights, the terrifying screech of tires on wet asphalt, and the cold, suffocating bite of rain. My memory of the accident was a fractured mirror, but the reality of my current existence was painfully clear. I was a guest in my own grave. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open, a harsh, grating sound that set my nerves on edge. Footsteps followed, heavy and deliberate on the wooden slats. It was Claire, my daughter. The girl I had once carried on my shoulders through the park was now a woman whose silhouette was sharp, cold, and unfamiliar. She carried a plastic tray with a small bowl of lukewarm broth, the steam rising in thin, pathetic ribbons. "How are you feeling today, Dad?" Claire asked. Her voice was different now. It was dripping with a rehearsed, clinical pity, the kind of tone one might use for a wounded animal that wasn't expected to survive the night. She set the tray down on the rickety folding table beside my cot. "My head hurts, Claire," I managed to rasp. My voice felt like it was being dragged over broken glass. "Why am I down here? Why can't I go upstairs to my bedroom?" Claire sighed, a long, weary sound as if my very existence was an exhausting chore. She sat on the edge of the only other chair in the room, her designer suit looking absurdly out of place against the peeling paint of the walls. "We've talked about this," she said softly, reaching out to pat my hand. Her touch was brief and devoid of any real warmth. "You had a stroke while you were under, Dad, after the accident. The doctor said the brain damage was extensive. You don't remember the meetings, do you?" "Meetings," I whispered. "What meetings?" "The legal ones," Claire replied, her eyes never leaving mine. "You signed the papers before the accident, Dad."
"You knew your health was failing. You wanted us to handle everything if the worst happened. We had to move you here for your own safety. The stairs at the old house were a liability." "The old house?" I asked, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "The house in the hills?" She nodded, her expression fixed in that mask of false sorrow. "It's gone, Dad. We had to sell it to cover your medical bills. The coma, the specialists, the long-term care. It drained everything. Marcus and I moved you into our basement so we could keep an eye on you ourselves. It's for the best. You're safe here." I looked at her, searching for even a flicker of the daughter I knew. I searched for the girl who used to be afraid of the dark, the girl I had tucked into bed every night for 18 years, promising her that nothing would ever hurt her as long as I was alive. But as I stared into her eyes, I didn't see my daughter. I saw a shark in a high-end blazer. I saw a woman who had calculated the value of my life and found it more profitable to have me dead than alive. "I'm a lawyer, Claire," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I spent 40 years protecting the legacies of others. I know the law. I know what a power of attorney looks like, and I know I never signed one for you." "You're confused, Dad," she snapped, her tone sharpening instantly. "That's the stroke talking. The cognitive impairment is significant. Dr. Eris said you would have these delusions of grandeur. You need to eat your broth and take your medication." She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a small plastic cup containing 2 blue pills. "Drink," she commanded. "It'll help with the agitation." I didn't want the pills. Every morning they made my tongue feel like a piece of lead, and my thoughts moved through a thick, suffocating molasses. They didn't feel like medicine. They felt like a lid being closed on my consciousness. I took the cup, my hand trembling, not from age, but from the sheer effort of suppressing my rage. I put the pills in my mouth and took a sip of the water she offered. I made a show of swallowing, watching her face for the satisfaction that usually followed. "Good," she said, standing up. "Marcus will be home soon. We have a lot of work to do for the foundation. Just try to rest, Dad. Don't think so much. It's not good for you." She turned and walked back up the stairs, the door locking with a heavy, final thud behind her.
I sat there in the silence, listening to the muffled sounds of the house above me. I didn't swallow the pills. As soon as I heard her footsteps retreat into the kitchen, I spat them out into the palm of my hand. I stared at them, the small blue anchors they were using to keep me submerged. I leaned over and tucked them into a deep crack in the floorboards beneath my cot, adding them to the collection I had started 2 days ago. My mind wasn't damaged. If anything, the isolation had sharpened it. I was a man who had made a living out of reading the fine print, and I was currently living in the most deceptive contract of my life. I knew the weight of a signature. I knew that my daughter was gaslighting me, using my physical weakness as a weapon to strip me of my agency. But I didn't realize the depth of the betrayal until that rainy Thursday afternoon. The house above was unusually active. I could hear furniture being moved, the clinking of glasses, and the high-pitched laughter of people who had something to celebrate. Claire had left her phone on the kitchen counter directly above my ceiling vent while she went to the garage to check on the catering deliveries. I could hear her conversation as clearly as if I were standing next to her. "It's done, Marcus," I heard her say. I could practically see the triumphant smile on her face. "The life insurance payout cleared this morning. $2 million flat, no questions asked. The hospital records were perfectly aligned." "$2 million," a man's voice replied. "Marcus, my son-in-law, a man who couldn't balance a checkbook but knew exactly how to spend someone else's money. That's a lot of charity, Claire." Claire laughed, a sharp, cold sound that vibrated through the metal of the vent. "The Sterling Foundation launch is next week. We're going to be the faces of local philanthropy, Marcus. The Elias Thorne Memorial Foundation. It sounds dignified, doesn't it? People love a good legacy story." "And the old man?" Marcus asked. "Oh, he's fine," Claire said dismissively. "He's exactly where a ghost should be. He's in a fog, Marcus. He doesn't even know what year it is. He's a tragic memory to the rest of the world, and he's a quiet house guest for us. It's the perfect arrangement." If you have ever sat in a cold, dark room and listened to your own child describe you as a profitable corpse, you know a hollowed-out grief that no prayer can heal. It is a spiritual PTSD that rewrites your soul in an instant.
I realized then that they hadn't just stolen my money, they had stolen my very existence. They had declared me dead to the world while I was still breathing, using my name as a front for their own vanity and greed. I wish someone had warned me that the greatest danger a man faces isn't a stranger in the dark or a criminal on the street, but the person who calls you dad while sharpening the knife. If anyone is listening to my voice, please don't make the mistake I did. Don't assume that blood is thicker than greed. Subscribe now, because I was about to prove that a ghost with a sharp mind and a legal background is the most dangerous thing you can have in your basement. I lay back on the cot, my heart beating with a rhythmic, steady drum of vengeance. I wasn't a ghost. I was the architect. I was the one who knew where every body was buried in the legal history of this city, and I was about to add 2 more to the list. I started spitting out every pill, every blue tablet, every white capsule. They all went into the cracks in the floor. As the days passed, I felt the wool lift from my brain hour by hour. The molasses in my veins was replaced by ice water. My strength returned in fits and starts. I began a regimen of quiet movement, stretching my atrophied muscles in the shadows of the basement where the cameras couldn't see. During my daily exercise hour, 60 minutes in a small, fenced-in concrete yard that Claire called my patio, I began to document everything. I found a discarded notebook in a pile of old magazines they had dumped in the corner. I hid it inside the lining of my mattress. Every arrival, every departure, every name I heard through the vents, it all went into the ledger. I was building a case, piece by agonizing piece.
I found my first real piece of evidence when the mailman accidentally dropped a glossy flyer into the basement mail slot instead of the main box upstairs. It fluttered to the floor like a falling leaf. I crawled over to it, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. It was an invitation to a gala. The Elias Thorne Memorial Foundation, a night of legacy. There was a photo of me on the front. It was a black and white portrait taken 5 years ago, back when I still believed the world was a place of order and justice. They had put a black ribbon across the corner. They were throwing a party to celebrate my death, using my stolen fortune to buy their way into high society. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it.
They were holding a memorial for a man who was currently sitting in their basement eating lukewarm broth. That night, I sat in the darkness, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the small barred window at the top of the wall. I looked at the flyer, then at the locked door. "I am not a ghost," I whispered to the shadows. My voice was no longer a rasp. It was the low, steady baritone of a man who had argued before the Supreme Court. "I am the architect of your downfall." But I knew I couldn't do it alone, not from here. I needed a witness. I needed someone who remembered the man I was before the paper trail was burned. I closed my eyes and sifted through the files of my memory, searching for a name, a face, a soul I could trust. Thomas. Thomas had been my law clerk for 15 years. He was a man who valued the truth as much as I did, a man whose integrity was as solid as the granite of the courthouse. He had retired shortly after I did, but he was still in the city. I knew him. I knew he wouldn't believe a forged death certificate if he saw it. He knew my signature. He knew my mind. I just had to find a way to reach him. The gears were turning now, clicking into place with the precision of a master watchmaker. For the first time in months, I felt truly alive. The adrenaline was a fire in my veins, burning away the last of the medicinal fog. I looked at the flyer again, focusing on the date of the gala. It was in 10 days. 10 days. The watch was ticking, and Claire was about to find out that dead men tell very long, very detailed stories. I stood up from the cot, my legs shaking but holding firm. I walked to the wall and placed my hand against the cold concrete. I could feel the vibrations of the house above, the echoes of the life they thought they had stolen from me. I began to plan. I thought about the spare key Claire kept hidden in the fake rock near the garage. I thought about the patrol schedule of the private security they had hired for the neighborhood. I thought about the layout of the Metropolitan Hall where the gala would be held. Every detail was a gear, every gear a part of the machine that would eventually crush them. I spent the rest of the night writing in my hidden notebook, the scratch of the pen the only sound in the room. I was no longer a victim. I was the auditor, and the books were about to be balanced.
As the first gray light of morning began to creep through the basement window, I tucked the notebook back into the mattress and lay down, closing my eyes just as I heard the door at the top of the stairs unlock. I went limp, letting my mouth hang open, becoming the empty vessel they expected. Claire walked in, her footsteps lighter than usual. She seemed happy. "Good morning, Dad," she said, her voice almost cheerful. "Ready for your breakfast?" I didn't answer. I just stared at the ceiling, a ghost waiting for the right moment to haunt the living. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy, expectant void. I could feel the weight of the secret tucked beneath me, the paper trail that led back to the light. She set the tray down and reached for my pulse, her fingers cool and professional. She didn't notice the fire behind my eyes. She didn't notice that the man in the bed was already gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. The rain began to tap against the small window, a steady, rhythmic sound, like a ticking clock. "It's going to be a long week, Dad," Claire whispered, more to herself than to me. "But don't you worry. By Friday, it'll all be over." I looked at the shadow she cast on the wall. You have no idea, I thought. Every second that passed was another second closer to the truth. Every breath I took was a breath they thought I didn't have. I watched her leave, the click of the lock sounding like the first note of a symphony I was about to play.
I sat up in the dark, the silence of the basement finally feeling like an ally instead of an enemy. I looked at the barred window, the rain streaking the glass in long, thin lines. The countdown had begun. Reclaiming a life is not merely a matter of drawing breath. It is the agonizing process of demanding the return of the space from which you were illegally evicted. It is a meticulous, soul-crushing audit of every lie told in your name. For 10 days I existed as a shadow, a phantom haunting the periphery of a world that had already written my obituary. I moved with the silent, practiced grace of a man who had spent 40 years navigating the hushed corridors of the Superior Court. Every night at 3 in the morning, when the house above me settled into a heavy, alcohol-induced slumber, I would emerge from my basement tomb. I had watched Claire hide the spare key in a hollow plastic rock near the overgrown hydrangeas weeks ago.
She thought I was a vegetable staring at the wall. She didn't realize I was a hunter studying the patterns of my prey. The first time I stepped out into the night air, the sheer weight of the oxygen nearly brought me to my knees. It was crisp, sharp, and tasted of freedom, a flavor I had forgotten in that mildew cellar. My legs, atrophied from months of forced confinement and chemical sedation, screamed with every step. I walked 5 miles, clinging to the shadows of suburban oaks and rusted street lamps, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. By the time I reached the modest brick house on the edge of the city, my lungs were burning and my vision was blurring at the edges. I hammered on the door with the last of my strength. It felt like an eternity before the porch light flickered on, blinding me. Thomas opened the door, rubbing sleep from his eyes, wearing a tattered robe that smelled of old tobacco. He looked at me, and I watched the color drain from his face until he was as pale as the moon behind me. He staggered back, his hand trembling as he gripped the doorframe for support. "Elias," he gasped, his voice a mere thread of a sound. "My God! Elias, we buried you. I stood there at the cemetery, man. I saw the mahogany. I saw the certificate of death from the hospital." I leaned against the brick wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "You saw a performance, Thomas. You saw a masterpiece of theater directed by my daughter and financed by my own life savings. Can I come in, or are you going to let a dead man collapse on your welcome mat?" Thomas hurried me inside, his hands shaking as he poured me a glass of water that I downed in seconds. He kept staring at me, as if expecting me to dissolve into mist at any moment. "I am not a ghost, Thomas," I said, my voice rasping but firm. "My mind is clear. The fog they pumped into me has finally lifted. I need your help to audit a crime that began the moment those tires screeched on the pavement 6 months ago. I need you to be my eyes in the courthouse. Claire and Marcus didn't just steal my house. They deleted me from the system. They forged a death certificate and a will that likely leaves everything to a foundation they control. I need every filing. I need every bank transfer. I need the paper trail they think they burned." Thomas didn't hesitate. He was a man of the law, a man who had been my right hand for 15 years, and the injustice of it seemed to ignite a fire in him that mirrored my own.
For the next week, his attic became our war room. It was a cramped space filled with the scent of old law books, stale coffee, and the quiet electricity of a brewing storm. "Did you find the hospital records?" I asked on the 3rd night, leaning over a stack of photocopies. Thomas sighed, rubbing his eyes. "I found something better, Elias. Or worse, depending on how you look at it. The death certificate wasn't issued by the attending physician at the trauma center. It was signed off by a deputy coroner named Vance. I did some digging. Vance has a gambling debt the size of a small skyscraper. 2 weeks after your supposed death, his mortgage was paid off in full by a shell company registered to Marcus's brother." "A masterclass in fraud," I whispered, staring at the grainy scan of the document. "My own daughter didn't just want me gone. She traded my very existence for a signature and a check. She sold my life to clear a stranger's debt." "How are you holding up?" Thomas asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. I looked at my hands. They were thin, the skin like parchment, but they were steady. "I'm not holding up, Thomas. I'm waiting. I'm waiting for the moment when the ledger is opened and the debt is called due." We found the midpoint twist that finally broke the lock on the safe. Claire hadn't just forged the death certificate, she had used it to trigger a life insurance policy I had forgotten I even owned, a legacy policy from my early days at the firm. $2 million. She had used that money to seed the Elias Thorne Memorial Foundation. "They're launching it tonight, Elias," Thomas said, gesturing toward the small television in the corner of the attic. The evening news was showing a clip of the Metropolitan Hall. Banners were being draped. Flowers were being delivered by the truckload. "The gala is tonight. Every judge you ever worked with, every politician who ever shook your hand, every socialite who wanted to be seen with you, they'll all be there. They're calling it your final gift to the city." "Then I should be there to present it, shouldn't I?" I said, a cold, sharp smile finally touching my lips. It's only polite for the guest of honor to attend his own memorial. The transformation was physical. Thomas had kept one of my old tuxedos from the firm's holiday parties years ago. It hung a bit loose on my frame now, but when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the broken man from the basement.
I saw Elias Thorne, the attorney who had never lost a cross-examination. My posture was straight, my hair was brushed back, and my eyes burned with a cold, rhythmic intensity. We arrived at the Metropolitan Hall an hour after the festivities had begun. The building was a temple of marble and light, a sea of silk, champagne, and forced smiles. I could hear the muffled roar of the crowd from the sidewalk. I gripped my silver-topped cane, the one Martha had given me for our 30th anniversary, and felt the steady, reassuring click of it against the stone. "Stay in the shadows for a moment, Thomas," whispered. "Let her get to the climax of the speech." I watched from the heavy velvet curtains at the back of the hall. The stage was bathed in golden light. Claire stood at the podium, looking radiant in a black gown that probably cost more than the basement I had been rotting in. Marcus stood behind her, his face a mask of solemn, grieving dignity. They looked perfect. They looked like the noble heirs of a fallen titan. "My father, Elias, believed in the sanctity of the law above all else," Claire told the hushed crowd, her voice amplified and echoing. She paused, a single, expertly timed fake tear glinting in the spotlight. "He believed that a man's worth is not measured by the wealth he accumulates, but by the legacy he leaves behind. Tonight, as we launch this foundation in his name, we honor the ghost of a man who gave us everything. He was a beacon of truth in this city, and though he is gone, his spirit remains the foundation of this work." I stepped out of the shadows. The sound of my cane hitting the marble floor was like a gavel striking a bench. Click, click, click. I walked down the center aisle, the tuxedo feeling like armor. The room began to go silent in ripples, starting from the back. People turned, their glasses frozen halfway to their lips. I saw Judge Miller's eyes go wide. I saw the mayor drop his program. The silence became absolute, a vacuum of sound that seemed to suck the very air out of the hall. I walked slowly, deliberately, until I was 10 feet from the stage. Claire was still smiling, looking out at the crowd, unaware of the shift behind her. Then she followed the gaze of the audience. She looked down the aisle. Her face didn't just go pale, it turned the color of ash. She staggered back. The microphone let out a piercing, mournful screech as she bumped into the podium.
The champagne glass in our hand hit the stage floor and shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You're a ghost!" she screamed, her voice cracking, echoing through the speakers. No, you're dead. You died in the hospital." I stood my ground, my eyes locked on hers. I could see the terror radiating off her, a physical thing that filled the gap between us. "No, Claire," I said. My voice was projected, calm, and carried the weight of 40 years of authority. It boomed through the speakers, amplified by the very microphone she had used to eulogize me. "I'm not a ghost. I'm your karma. And while the law doesn't recognize ghosts, it certainly recognizes fraud, bribery, and the forging of a death certificate." The room erupted in a low, frantic murmur. I gestured toward the back of the hall. Thomas stepped forward, followed by 2 men in dark suits, detectives I had known since they were rookies. They were holding a blue litigation folder, the one containing the audit of her crimes. The Metropolitan Hall which Claire had spent months turning into a temple to her own vanity, transformed in an instant. It became a courtroom. The guests watched, paralyzed by the drama, as the detectives walked onto the stage. "Dad, please," Claire wailed, her voice high and thin, the sound of a child who finally realized the ground had vanished beneath her. She was being led down the steps, her designer heels clicking frantically. "We were in debt, Dad. Marcus lost the firm. We were going to tell you eventually. We were just protecting the assets." I didn't look away. I watched as the steel handcuffs clicked around her wrists, the same wrists I used to hold when I taught her how to walk in the park. "You told the world I was dead, Claire," I said quietly. The hall so silent, my whisper could be heard in the back row. "I'm just returning the favor. As of this moment, the Thorne estate is frozen. The foundation is dissolved. You wanted my legacy, Claire. Now you have it. You're a Thorne. We face our judgments with dignity. I suggest you start finding yours." I watched them lead Marcus and Claire out of the hall. The crowd parted like a dark sea, their whispers following the pair like a shroud. I didn't feel the surge of joy I expected. I felt a profound, hollow sadness, the grief of a man who had realized that he had raised a stranger. But beneath that was something else, a foundation, a sense of structural integrity that had finally been restored. The house is quiet now. My house.
I returned the next morning, but the air in those grand rooms felt heavy with the scent of her perfume and the lingering echoes of her lies. I didn't want it anymore. I didn't want the marble or the hill or the prestige. I sold the Thorne estate within 48 hours. I didn't care about the price. I kept enough to live simply and donated the remaining millions to the very charities Claire had used as a front, actual organizations for elder legal defense and victim advocacy. I moved into a small, weathered cottage by the sea, miles away from the city that had buried me alive. It is a place of salt and wind and truth. I spent this evening sitting on the small wooden porch, a cup of real tea in my hand, steaming and honest. The orange light of the setting sun reflected off the water, painting the world in hues of copper and gold. I listened to the waves crashing against the rocks. It was a rhythmic, unwavering sound, a heartbeat. I took a deep, slow breath. The air didn't taste like mildew. It didn't taste like medicine. It tasted like the end of a long, dark sentence. I looked down at my hands. They were still thin, but they were no longer shaking. I wasn't a memory anymore. I wasn't a line item on a forged will. I was a man who had survived his own funeral and found that the air tastes better when you've had to fight for every single breath. I looked at the horizon, where the sky met the sea, and for the first time in my life, the silence was enough. The orange sun dipped below the edge of the world, leaving a lingering warmth on my face.